drivers? Well, there's no doubt that if you consider what Australia needs in terms of medical practitioners for the next decade and beyond, then there's a whole interesting dynamic about the number of generalists, specialists, those working in rural areas and so on. And I'm not sure necessarily the curricula of today in Australia necessarily are satisfying that future balance. So we need to consider what that kind of mix will be in making sure that we address the healthcare workforce needs in the future. And then, of course, there are a number of roles that are being undertaken by non-medical people now that used to be entirely in the medical domain. Less developed in Australia than, say, I was used to in the UK, where there are nurse practitioners doing whole endoscopy lists, for example, as opposed to medics. So some of that's going to happen in Australia, it's inevitable, and we need to consider that sort of potential mix in the future when we're thinking about what should the future curriculum look like. A very important one is about the qualifications frameworks. It's a fairly boring, big document about the Australian qualifications framework, and this is about level 7, level 9 degrees, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. It is quite important because it draws a distinction between bachelor degrees and so-called MD degrees. And there's a lot happening nationally. A lot of universities are moving towards graduate-only entry programs that are MDs as opposed to the MBBS course that we have here. There are lots of things happening in the state health department, federal healthcare systems and so on, which we need to take account of. And like it or not, there is an increasingly competitive postgraduate environment. When you all graduate, it is going to be more competitive to get into the kind of training programs that you want to get into to do specialist training than it was in the past. That's just an inevitability. There are some opportunities. These are not drivers for change, but an opportunity for enhancing the change, one of which is the integrated clinical school, which is the building proposed to be built at the other end of North Terrace. And there's the increasing importance of globalisation of health. So with all of that background, one of the things that I felt was important for us to do in the course of this year, my first year here, was to develop in parallel with the university's strategic plan, a strategic plan for the medical programme. Now, one of the things that is important to say right from the start is, as you've heard from Professor Faull, we have decided now not to go ahead with the international MD for the time being. I know that some of you were a bit concerned about us running that in parallel with the MBBS. That is not going to happen for a variety of reasons. But there are a number of things in the strategic plan which we are proposing at least to explore in great detail, and it's very likely to happen over the next few years. Now, the strategic plan has been seen by members of the AMSS who are on the various strategy boards that we've got. It's also been seen by the faculty board and various other faculty committees, and is about to go to the academic board of the university. Once it's been through that, then I will happily get this circulated to all medical students. The MedEd, is that right? MedEd team have already seen this, but I just wanted to share with you today some of the kind of key elements of that. And one of the important things here was that in the document, which first of all, the first bit of it, half of it almost, is kind of going over those drivers for change. Why would we want to think about change at this stage? And then we move into sections that deal with just what are we trying to do, what are we trying to produce in Adelaide as we move forward. And so we've articulated a vision and mission for the programme, which we hadn't done previously, and then a whole set of programme-specific graduate attributes, which try to tackle a lot of these elements that I've said we'll need to be able to deliver in the future to provide the right kind of healthcare workforce for 2025 and beyond. Now, I'm not planning to go through those individual attributes today, but they have all been fed into by members of AMSS who sit on the programme strategy board. There are some other elements within the strategic plan which talk about exploring new ways of delivering teaching and learning in, say, 5th year, with the proposal to at least explore a programme which is to some extent replicating the rural programme but doing it in an urban setting. In other words, a longitudinal experience that combines secondary care exposure with primary care exposure. These are just ideas at the moment, and we need to look quite carefully at how we could deliver that and what would be the underpinning resource to get it working properly. We're also looking at different approaches to assessment, including moving away, at least in part of the course, from the non-graded passes format that you currently have. I'm aware that not all students would welcome that, and there are some consequences that we would want to avoid through that, but I believe that in an increasingly competitive world out there, it is going to be important for you to be able to differentiate yourselves from graduates of other programs in that workforce market in the future. But probably one of the most radical bits of the strategic plan, which is not really that radical at all, but probably one of the most different bits of this plan is our proposed move towards an MD degree. And I'll go through now in a little bit of detail why we might want to do that. Now, just going back to these qualification frameworks, the AQF, the Australian Qualification Framework, set levels for the different types of degree qualifications that there are in this country. The MBBS is a level 7 qualification, a master's degree is a level 8, and MD degrees, which are being offered by a number of other medical schools in the country, is regarded as a level 9. Now, we know that the output in terms of work readiness, being able to hit the ground running in internship, is no different between what we're doing in Adelaide compared to those MD programs. Indeed, we believe, and we've got some anecdotal evidence, that the graduates of this university do better than those coming out those other qualifications. However, we want to avoid any perception that the University of Adelaide graduates have a lesser degree in the future. We don't want you or your successors to lose out in this. So that's why the proposal is to move towards, from a 6-year MBBS to a 6-year bachelor, 3-year MD program. So stay a 6-year program and remain largely a degree into which you come from school. So it's still going to be a school leaver entrance, but we just split the course up into 2. It's not a simple split because we have to include in the second bit of it a lot more in the way of a research theme. Now that's not just necessarily going to be, in fact it won't be for most, a lab-based wet lab research project like you do in many of the honours degrees. It will be research in its broadest sense, and it will be linked to clinical experience for most. But we have to have that to enable us to justify calling it an MD and for it then to go to the level 9 qualification. Once we've done that, there is the opportunity for us, and we're not saying we're necessarily going to do this, but there is the opportunity for us to build an alternative stream which would be a graduate program. In other words, we would have a 3-year MD program exactly the same as this 6-year program, but students who have graduated from some other science degree would come in and do a 1-year diploma, which would be full of clinical skills, picking up all the clinical bits from the 3-year bachelor here, and then there would be a sort of 3+4 degree. So quite similar to some of the graduate entry programs elsewhere. Now that is a possibility with that scheme. I'm not saying that that's going to be something we would jump into, but it's something that is, for a number of reasons, quite attractive. But the predominant route, I still believe, in Adelaide, and something which would make us remain quite distinctive, would be a school leaver entrance into the program. So I think that's all I had by way of slides, because I think the rest of the time should be really over to you for questions to Professor Faull and I on anything we've delivered, but also anything you feel you want answers to.
Thanks very much for Burt. So yeah, I think we can have a very informal discussion. I don't think I even need to be up here. But does anyone have any questions Jared?
Yep, I'm just wondering, does a student who does the first 3 years of the proposed program have automatic entry into the MD program, or is there a...
So at the moment, what you see there is the scheme, kind of the broad. So we will, assuming we go ahead with this, will almost certainly there would be a barrier at the end of year 3. The assumption would be that most students entering the program would get through that barrier and into the remainder of the program. But there would be a need for us, as there is really in many bits of programs, to have a barrier. And that barrier probably would include an assessment of professionalism, all that sort of thing. And so the strategic plan raises the possibility, if you do that, and you have a barrier at the end of 3rd year, which includes professionalism, then maybe we need to look differently at the way we assess students before they come into the program, where we are increasingly looking at those professionalism aspects. But if you have a barrier later, maybe you don't need that. Those sorts of details are yet to be properly worked out.
Perhaps part of what Jared may have been thinking about, so that first 3 years will be medical student specific, it won't be open to other students.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. But one of the important bits about this is that a lot of the content we've been now meeting quite regularly, and you'll have AMSS representation on that as we move forward. Those first 3 years, there's an awful lot of good things already go on. There's an opportunity for us to change bits that could be improved upon, and we may add bits into the 3rd year of that 3-year bachelor, which would be more clinical, and maybe move some stuff that you will get later on in the current programme. So it's quite a clinical bachelor, which is why anyone coming from a different route would have to do a diploma to get up to speed on all of that. But first of all, it's absolutely right. That stream in the first bachelor, we still haven't decided precisely what the name would be. That's entirely a kind of sort of medical school.
With that schematic diagram that was up previously, has the 2 streams with graduate and undergraduate entry. Is the MD program going to be identical for both streams?
Yes.
And if so, how will you ensure that the 1-year diploma students are as well equipped to handle the course as the 3-year bachelor students?
Well, that's where, crucially, we need to have that 1-year diploma well balanced, and it will be heavily weighted towards developing the skills that would normally be in those first 3 years. Now, that's a tall ask. I've actually been involved in a program which did this before, but that was truncating 2 years into 1 year. Having said that, the expectation is that those who come in will be coming in from good quality science degrees. For example, it may be that they're coming in having graduated from the new advanced bachelor degree, which is being proposed in the faculty here. So the basis of fundamentals of science will be there. The diploma is all about upskilling in terms of the clinical skills and heavily weighted CBL type stuff.
We might bring in some prerequisites.
Yeah.
If there was a barrier between the 3-year bachelor and the 3-year MD, if you couldn't pass the barrier, do you have a degree that will help you in the workforce?
So the plan would be there, providing you didn't completely bomb it, then it would be a bachelor, which is actually one of the routes currently which are open to some students who, for whatever reason, don't proceed. So that bachelor degree, and it's like at the moment these bachelor degrees are still have a good deal of currency in the workplace, and it may be that those individuals will go into some other healthcare profession, and that's still. One of the possibilities there in the future might be, and this is speculative, would be around physician assistant type roles, which is not something that's been developed in Australia to any extent, but I bet my dollar on it that that's going to happen here in years to come. So that would be one possibility.
Josh?
Just curious, would a student who unfortunately passed the barrier and got that degree, would they have the opportunity to repeat that year, or would they do the diploma and then get into the MD program?
That's a very interesting one that we have not thought through properly yet. At the moment, really, I want to really for us to get the green light to develop this properly. One of the issues I know which came up when I spoke to the TMed, was around a transition. How could we, at what stage could we move from the existing programme into the new scheme? And we actually took a good 2-hour session just working through some of the ifs and buts about that a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of details still to be sorted out, which is why I'm very keen that we get this through academic board. I went to University Learning Committee, so I don't envisage there's going to be any problems, but we're all ready to work on some of those very specific issues.
But I don't want you guys going away thinking that the idea is that there will be a cull at the end of the third year that will be taking 20% off the top.
Yeah.
That's definitely not the plan.
I imagine it would be much like third year to fourth year.
Yeah, I mean, it's already a significant jump between third and fourth year, so it's not going to be some standard policy that 20% must fail.
No, because actually if we do that sort of thing, we'll be, it'll be very, we will not be a popular programme for people to enlist in. So that's not part of it. And this business about having this second stream, that would probably occur a little bit later anyway.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of negotiations with Commonwealth about the funding of those sort of places.
Louisa?
I was going to ask, with the second stream, would they be sitting like the GAMSAT or any of those kind of tests? And would that be coming before or after the diploma?
There's various ways of doing this, and it could be either before or after. You could in fact ensure, if we were going to say that part of the barrier after the third year of the bachelor was professionalism, you could do the same in the diploma. So these external tests have their merit, but they're not perfect. So again, that's a lot of detail that we need to make a decision about what those prerequisites would be and what, sort of how do we select for getting into the diploma, and how many of those diploma places in the future then would feed into it, and there's all sorts of issues around.
Jen?
So you have tertiary transfer going to diploma, and I'm just wondering, is that postgraduate tertiary transfer or undergraduate tertiary transfer?
These are undergraduates. So this is what happens at the moment. There is of course a tertiary transfer option at the moment. So one possibility in the future is that there will be a different form of tertiary transfer that would go into this, not having necessarily completed the full programme. Now, I think that there will be increasing emphasis on advanced bachelors, and I think that would be, my first diagrams of this were done before the notion of advanced bachelors, so I think that might be a better and alternative way of going into the system.
Right.
I was talking to an international student today, and he was adamantly opposed to the transition to an MP. And I questioned his reasoning, and he said two major reasons. Firstly, cost. For an international, apparently he said that for an international student it would be much cheaper to go to an MD program in the US. So I suppose the first question is, if we transition to this model, we'll be worried about a decreased proportion of international students applying. And then secondly, the other issue you raised, which you've already touched on, is whether the top 20% of bachelor, the people in the third year of the bachelor degree being only admitted to the MD. And I suppose the background of that is that if, say, there's always the predisposition for universities to be money grabbers, and if they have more students entering the bachelor degree, they're going to be earning more money. So there could be a drive from the central community to be getting more. Would there be any measures?
Well, just to answer that second one, first of all, that would only really kick in if we were talking about there being the introduction of local fee-paying students, because the numbers that we'll have in this programme are going to be dictated to by CSP. So I don't think that would have any impact. In terms of international competitiveness, that's an issue for this country as a whole, actually. The education programmes are beginning to be very expensive in the international market, all sorts of reasons, but not the least of which is has been the strength of the dollar. I'm not sure about the issue about competing with the States. I still think that there's a lot on offer here that would, so if we retain a school leaver entrance, there will still be an interest of that from quite a lot of parts of Southeast Asia, for example. So I thought the issue you were going to raise, which has been an issue in another medical school in the country, was that the MD wouldn't be recognised in their own country as the qualification as opposed to an MBBS. And at least one university, I think it's maybe Sydney, have retained the option for students to say, no, actually I don't have an MD, I've got an MBBS, because it's recognised in their own country.
Yeah.
Regarding, similar to the GAMSAT question, would a UMAT or an interview be required at the start of the undergraduate or the graduate degree? Are they still going to be in place?
So we hosted in Adelaide about 3-4 months ago a national symposium on selection for medical and dental schools. And one of the things that I came away from that really quite astonished by was there are just so many different approaches to it that I guess we haven't got it quite right yet. So if there was a perfect way, we'd all be doing it the same way. And at that meeting, there were proponents and opponents to the GAMSAT and UMAT and so on. So I think in moving forward, we shouldn't be stuck in a mindset we definitely have to remain in the, let's say 10 years from now, we'll still be doing the same. I think we need to look at what the best way to predict what, we're going to get the best graduates out of. Now, what I said earlier is, if you decide that one of the reasons we have the interview type processes now, which I think are very effective, and I am a proponent, but one of the reasons there is actually in part to just get a measure of how enthusiastic the applicant is, and to some extent kind of attitudes to professionalism. But if you actually have that as part of your barrier after third year, you could argue you don't need to do that before they come in. These are just, again, hypotheticals.
No?
If we assume that the MBA program goes ahead, what will it mean for us as current MBA students, and how will that transition work?
Well, that transition is very complicated. Tom, I think, heard us debate that about a week or two ago, and we will come forward with a plan about how that would all feed through, so that we didn't, other medical schools, a sort of traditional model for this is that you actually just work through one degree, you introduce another. So you've actually got some 6 years where you're kind of winding down an individual program. I certainly want to make sure that we don't do that. And we want to have a transition model which is fair but implementable. So there's a lot of work still to be done about that. It's something which is easy to put on a sort of a simple diagram, but the more we talk about it, just what needs to be done at different stages is something we're working through at the moment.
And it's great, it's awesome there are so many questions, but also keep in mind we are allowed to ask questions about not just the structure and exactly how to flow through. So there's lots of things that are exciting in this plan. So,
I'll switch that off in case it is distracting too much.
I'm afraid mine's also about that plan. I was just wondering that with the increased research component of the MD program, would that make honours less desirable? What would the effects be? So
that's a good point. In my diagram, I've kept honours there. Because it was why I ended up doing what I'm doing today. I ended up, I did an intercalated 2 years honour type thing, and I loved it. And I would like that to be retained. Will it remain something which is attractive? I don't know. I hope it will be for some. In terms of this level 7, level 9, one of the important things there is if you have a level 9 qualification, then you're eligible to enrol in a level 10, which is a PhD. If you've just got a level 9, then theoretically at the moment you'd end up having to do 2 years masters. Sorry, level 7. You need to do 2 years master degree before you were able to do a PhD, which would really have a severe knock-on effect on graduates of this university. And so, so having an honours in that schema wouldn't really be all that helpful in terms of a prerequisite to a PhD. On the other hand, having a year out earlier in the programme for some stimulates their interest in research and academia. So I would like to retain it, and it's in there for the time being. But the whole issue about where honours sits in universities like this is undergoing a lot of discussion, and it's something that's happening nationally as well.
Shane?
Yeah, so my question sort of follows on from Annie's in that, so currently a lot of students choose to do Adelaide MSc honours because they want to pursue a project in an area of interest. Do you foresee that being possible within the final 3 years of the MD program?
Yes, so assuming we go down this track, all students would have to have some form of experience which had an underpinning research element. And one of the thoughts at the moment is that that would be something which starts in 4th year, a little bit more in 5th year, and then a bit more time in 6th year to finish off. But for some, it might be a much more intensive experience on an advanced research block, and that might then replace the honours. The other option is actually for us to have an advanced bachelor option for that first 3 years. So those are the sorts of things. Certainly, the Vice Chancellor's vision is about focusing on excellence and a research ethos, and so it would be inconsistent if we said, oh, well, research doesn't matter here, you just need to do it as part of the MD. We want to be able to have those opportunities for students who want to have that additional research experience and exposure, and whether it's going to be best by developing an advanced bachelor there, retaining an honours, or just seeing that as an advanced study as part of the research bit of the MD is an area for further discussion.
JJ?
My question is sort of following up again on this sort of research thing. In the US, they have like these MD, PhD programs. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on like maybe like that sort of thing in this proposed bachelor?
So I'm a little bit of a fan of those. I ran an MB PhD program in my previous institution only for a very limited number of individuals. And it was possible under the qualifications framework in the UK. The way things have been set up in Australia, I don't think it's going to be possible to do MD PhDs. You'd have to do the PhD after the MD. And I think that's going to be a tough ask, because most people will want to get straight into their internship and then do a PhD later. So I think that whilst my original diagrams had an MD PhD option, I think in the current framework it's not going to be possible. But nonetheless, we want to encourage people to be aspiring to that. But it's going to be a limited number. My experience with the MB PhD course that I was involved in was that actually it was a very, very difficult process for even the brightest of students, because there they had to do essentially an honours, convert to a PhD, and then come back and do the final year in medicine. So some of them had felt that they were a bit rusty with the clinical skills when they came back in, and for all of them they were still writing up the thesis where they came back in to do the final year. And so we had some good successes, and 1 or 2 of them are now very experienced and highly successful clinical academics in their own right. But we also have some really bright people who actually found that just too much and gave up any thoughts of academic medicine, because it just had been, they sort of put them off. So it's only for a few, and that sort of experience, I think we've got to be careful to make sure that it's not just that we select the brightest of students, but also we have the right kind of supervisors and the right kind of projects to make sure that those kind of elements of transition are well considered.
Listen.
Can I just make a comment that the international experience is a bit mixed as well. Some institutions have not found it very. It sounds good in theory, but it's also an issue of when you do your PhD as well. A lot of people doing a PhD before they do their specialty training, it may not end up being the right thing to do, because then their interests may change a lot, and then by the time they finish their specialty training, their PhD skills were 6 years before they may lose. So it's not quite as straightforward as it sounds.
So a model that I would love to see develop in Australia, in particular South Australia, is akin to what was set up in the UK, which was that after your internship, you go into, if you're wanting to have an academic career, there are some specially set up training posts which combine clinical and research experience. It takes slightly longer, but they provide funding that then gets you into almost a fast-track PhD.